Hello, everyone. Welcome to the final little lecture on our week two material. In this lecture, we're going to be covering exceptions and how we can use them in our code. And we're kind of going to make a method. I will show off this, the Java file called array_except.java file, which kind of combines a bunch of stuff that you should know how to read at the end of this week and understand what's going on in it. To go ahead and get started, though, the lecture notes talk a bit about exceptions, and I wanted to show off the exact definitions so that we are all on the same page here. An exception essentially is what is automatically generated by Java when an error is encountered that we could potentially recover from. So essentially, an exception is something that could happen, except it might be recoverable. Now, some exceptions are like a division by zero, array out of bounds accessing, or trying to open a non existent file. So, again, let's just say that you're a software developer and you're trying to output a program that goes ahead and opens files for users. You don't want your program, if the file isn't found that the user expects it to be, to just crash and kind of just like totally break on the user. You might want to be able to recover and then try to re-enter into a state that's usable, recoverable from. Now, this is a potentially recoverable error. Some errors that aren't recoverable or something that won't just be able to be put in as an exception is like stuff such as class definitions not being found or method names that aren't really present. So again, in this scenario, if you're trying to reference, let's say you have a method called minimum age and you try to reference it and you didn't, and you try to reference it as maximum age, that's an error that we can't recover from. It's just something that you need to make sure doesn't happen. Great. So with this idea in mind, an exception again is something that will be thrown for us. So an exception is thrown during the program execution, and then it will cause us to have a certain error. Now, there's actually quite a few different exception classes inside of Java. And each, you might have seen these before in Python as well. A try catch clause inside, or excuse me, a try except clause inside of Python is the same idea. You might have something that says except value error, except file not found error. Those are errors that occur when we can't find something that we should expect to be there. Now, there's two portions of every exception clause. There is going to be a try, and then there will also be an except. Now, the except, oh, excuse me, not catch clause. Sorry, I'm confusing my Python and Java. But essentially here we have our try and our catch. And when we have our try, this is a block of code that is going to be running. And I'm going to try to reference the lecture notes here so you can see it before. So let me just go ahead and grab up the comment from the lecture notes for us. So inside of our try clause here, this is essentially where the block of code that might throw an exception. So let's just say that you're trying to access a file. That code that's trying to access the file should go up here because that could throw the exception. If in the catch area, what you want down here is something that the program will need to do in case the try doesn't run and it throws an exception. And now you'll notice here, there's an important note, it does not go back. So this isn't like an if and an else that's like easy to jump between or there's no way to go back to it. There is a more more in-depth areas of it as well. And underneath this here, I'll go ahead, put this one in as well. We have the other clauses that might go here. So now, an interesting thing as well is that I can have multiple catch clauses as well, like so, within my code. And I don't have the classes just yet. Let's just say this is an exception. And these are areas that we can work with. And in your, let's see right here, a very basic one that we could see is something called an illegal argument exception. So essentially, this is the type of exception, and you'll notice that this type of format, the illegal argument, is really similar to saying something like int variable. We determine the type, and then we give it the type name. This can be E for all we care as well. This could be except anything as well. I'm going to use exception because it's a very common term that we see, and then we can build it out from there. Now, in our code here, we have a very straightforward example of trying to access values in an array and trying to print them out. So what I want to go ahead and do here is I'm going to go ahead and bring in my scanner class as well. So I'm going to do java.util.all, and I'm going to go ahead and create a scanner inside of my main method. And what I'll do for right now is I'm just going to delete that second catch. I'll leave the comments right here. And I'll say my S for scanner is equal to new scanner system.in. Now, you'll notice here, I kind of want to show off a method of how you can determine how you find these different exceptions. Once I go ahead and I create the scanner, I can go ahead and try to run it inside of my code here. And before I do that, I'm going to create an array. I'm going to create an array of values like so. And I'm going to set them equal to, let's just do -8, 4, 5, 9, or sorry, 9, 1, 5, 4. And we didn't cover this in depth yet, but if you notice here, I went ahead and I did a single line declaration of an array. This is one way you can declare an array. There's a bunch of different ways that you can declare an array as well. We did it the other way this way, where we made an array of size 6 and then we filled it up with items inside of here. This way as well is completely fine. It doesn't matter how you create them, as long as you don't get the errors from them. So let me go ahead and try to run our code. And we'll see here that it runs just fine. I didn't get an error, and then I have my values here. So what I want to do is similar to this practice array example we have in our examples. I'm going to go ahead and ask the user to give me an index value that they want to see inside of the array. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to print out print. And what I'm going to print out is please enter the index value. And what should happen is int user input is equal to mys.nextInt. So essentially here, what I'm going to be looking for is, okay, go ahead and try to grab the, excuse me, the value that is at this array. And so what I'll do next is I'm going to go ahead and print out a new line that says the value at index user input is, and then I'll go ahead and do something a bit fancy right here. I'm going to access my values array, and I'm going to go ahead and put in that user input array index that they gave me. So essentially what my code should do is that if I go ahead and run this code, I should be able to put in 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then get a value back out. So let me try to run this code. Okay, let me try to put in 0. And then the value at index 0 is -8. Cool. And you know what? I kind of want our code to run a few more times, like repeatedly. I don't want it to just exit. I don't want to keep hitting play. So what I'm going to do is do this method we saw before. I'm going to go ahead and create a variable that says boolean is done is equal to false. And while this variable is false, I'm going to go ahead and I want to make sure, I'll delete that as well. I want to make sure that it keeps running until I'm done with it. So please enter the index value, put in a 0. The value at index 0 is -8. Good. What about 1? The value at index 1 is 4. This looks good. Okay, I can keep going. 3 is 9. And if you notice here, if you can take a look at the console, you'll see that as I increase my value there, oh, this should be 6. I get the numbers back. So what happens if I have a 7 now? Well, notice here that I get this exception in thread main. And this actually provides me the exact exception that I'm accounting for right now. So what I did right here is I entered 7, and you notice I only have 0 to 6 as my index values. So what happens is Java gives me an index 7 out of bounds for length 7. Now, you'll notice here, let's try to practice this a little bit. I have my catch illegal argument exception. That looks pretty good. So what I want to try to say is, okay, well, how about when I try to do this and I get an exception error, I want to print out something down here that says, hey, I caught the exception. Let's see here. And I'm going to say, because I'm looking at my index values of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I'm going to say, hey, put in, please enter index values of 0 to 6 only. So essentially, I could tell the user, hey, you messed up a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you what to do next so you can go back to it. Now, we'll see here that I went ahead and I have an error where I'm not able to continue anymore with my program. So what I'm going to do is I can try to run this again. And let me try to enter in my 7, which gave me the error again. And this doesn't look like it's working though, right? You'll see here, I'm not accessing any of these print statements. So what's happening is I'm actually catching the wrong exception and I'm not printing it out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and copy this catch statement again. But instead of doing an illegal argument exception, and you'll notice here, because I'm already using it, it's going to give me a little bit of a complaint here. What I want to do is to go ahead and grab this type of an exception. And again, when you get the error, Java will tell you the exception that it's encountering. So let me put this here, array index out of bounds exception, and I run it. Let me try to enter 7 again. Look at this. Now I have my 7. Let me try to enter it again. Oops, I keep getting the exception. Maybe I could put in a 1. And now my program is running just fine. And you'll see here, this is much better than my program giving me a big red error and then keeping going like that. Now, if you have an exception where you want to make sure that it's over, maybe they put in something like this. Let me see. An illegal argument one. Or input mismatch exception. I just did something where I have an input mismatch. What I can do here is I can say catch an input mismatch exception, like so. And then what I can do is say is done is equal to true. And then I could say system.out.println finishing the program. So if I encountered this pretty odd exception, I'm just going to tell Java to exit the program. And I'm going to set is done to be true. So I should exit out of my while loop. And then I'm going to go ahead and print a line that says final print statement at bottom of main. And so I'm going to try to run this again. And I think what I did here is I kind of spammed my keyboard a bit, but I went like something like this. And I have a few random things here. Let me try to run this. Oops, I should have hit enter. Look at this. I was encountering the input mismatch exception. And then I say finishing the program. And then I have my final print statement. So exceptions are very powerful tools, and they're really useful for a lot of different areas. And you might be wondering, well, how many do I need to remember? All you need to remember is that you when you have an error, you can go ahead and find the exception that it is and then account for it. And this is try catch clauses, and they're really useful for making some really interactive and useful programs that allow yourself to continue. And you'll notice that these two exceptions won't exit my while loop. I can go back to my try clause because when I exit my catch, I go back up to the while. The reason this one exits my while loop is this piece of code right here that says is done is equal to true. And once this says is done is true, it's no longer at false. Thus, I have to exit my while loop. Now, I want to go ahead and show off the array exception file in Java. This is provided for you. And this is a really neat file that goes ahead, and I'll run it for us here. Essentially what happens, the value at position 0 is -7. And we'll see here that I get this java.lang.illegal argument exception. So what happens here is this program runs, and it tells us to enter the array index, and then it gives us the position at that certain array. And then it goes ahead and it finishes up this while loop. So all it does is do it. Now what happens here is, let me actually try to do the catch clause first. Catch an array index out of bounds. Let me try to hit 10. We'll see that the valid indexes are between 0 and 2 only. What if I go ahead and type in 12? The valid indexes are between 0 and 2. So if I type in 0, we'll notice that I get the the value at position 0 is -7. And what happens is that if I pass this print statement and I don't encounter this error, I exit my while loop, and then I go into another try and catch. And what this try and catch does is it goes ahead and it puts into my array of elements down here, or excuse me, it takes in a value and then it puts it into this function. So what I can do here is, let's try to run this with a 1. And we'll see here that the 1 is at 0 still. So let me try to put this at a 2. And this function is still... Oh, so this function is taking the max age here, but let's try to add a little bit more to this method as well. We'll see the largest of the elements in the array is max age and array. And we'll see here that this array function has a few negative elements inside of it. So let me go ahead, and because we have negative elements inside of it, we are throwing this illegal argument exception that is thrown down here. And this argument is thrown when the if statement runs that says if elements of I is less than 0. So because we have an elements of I that is less than 0, we go ahead and we get this new error here. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is modify this guy to be 7. And now if I try to run my program again, let me enter it in at value 1. We'll see that we get the position at 0, and now this isn't giving me the illegal argument exception anymore. It is now saying the largest of the elements in the array is 13. And you'll notice here how we're getting through this array to determine max age is we're taking in an array of elements. And notice that a method that takes in parameters up here, the type of the parameter that needs to be put in needs to be said that it's an int of arrays. So again, as a little example that we could do back in my exception practice, let's go ahead and try to create another array of values here. And let's just say I want to determine what the largest of these values are. What I can do is let's go ahead and make another static method down here. Let me just make sure I'm not outside of my main. There we go. And I can say, hey, make me a public static void determine, let's do minimum here, determine min. And what I want to do is determine the minimum of the amount of values that are here. And what I could say is int. So I want to take in an array of integers, array of ints like so. And I'm going to return, and I'm going to return the minimum value that's there. So because I'm taking in an integer and I want to return an int, I'm going to need to put int right here. For the time being, I'm going to say return 0. And what I'll do right here is I'm going to say int min is equal to 0. And this is something that's a little tricky when you're starting Java at the start here. You don't need to care about whatever is taken in. All you need to care about is that whatever array you're taking in is referred to as array of ints. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say for int of I is equal to 0. This is how we made our for loops before. I is less than array of ints, I plus plus. What I want to do... Oh, and you'll notice here I forgot my dot length to determine how much I should go to. And again, remember, we don't want to go equal to the length because that's out of an index bounds error. What I'll say now is if array of ints at I, if the value at the array of ints of I, so if the value at index I is less than, I'm going to say equal to as well, just in case, is less than or equal to the min. So essentially, if the current number I'm looking at is less than or equal to the min, I'm going to go ahead and set that min equal to the array of ints of I. Now, how would I go ahead and do this for the maximum? I would just reverse it, right? So if the value at array of ints is greater than or equal to max, that value now becomes my max. Now, what I can do now is return this value of min. And let's try to see if this guy works for us. And what I'll do here is after we run this piece of code here, I'm going to say, let's see here. I'm just going to say if the user inputted, if user input is equal to 0, I'm going to run this file. I'm going to run this function, excuse me, this method. So the way I can run this method is determine min, and I need to pass it the parameter of values. And how come this works? Well, what is values? It's an array of ints. What happens if I delete these two guys here? Uh-oh, I'm getting a few errors, and what's up here? The method determine min in the type exception practice is not applicable for the arguments int of array of ints. So essentially here, I'm trying to pass in an array of ints to a parameter that's only expecting an integer. So I need to put in these two brackets to tell this parameter that it is indeed an array of integers. Now, if I run this guy here, and let's just say I put in my 0, I say the index, the value at index 0 is -8. And I don't think, let me see here. If user input is equal to 0, let me see here. I'm going to print out the return value of the determine min. So it should say to me that the it should print out -8 up here, and then it should also print it out down here as well. So let's just see if this guy works for us. Cool. And you can see here that the value at index 0 is 8. And then let me just make this very clear for us that this is from the method. The method returned, if I put in 0, the method returned 8. If I put in 1, you'll see here that these don't run. But if I put in 0, I get the method return -8. So cool. This one would a bit longer than expected. Apologies, but that was a bit of practice with the minimum one as well. And again, please make sure that you experience a bit with the catches. And again, you don't need to memorize every single catch exception. There's a ton of them, but you'll actually find that when you make these errors and you catch them in your code down here, you can then use the try and catch to really make nice code. So please practice around with these files. Have access to these example files. There will be on the assignment for help with them as well. And any questions, please let me know. Thank you, everyone.